Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. Out of all of the characters from the exciting Street Fighter universe, there is perhaps one fighter that I am requested to cover on here, perhaps more than any other. With many people even noting that this character looks like, well, me. This stylish, mustachioed, muscular Englishman with beautiful, piercing blue eyes is often considered one of the highlights of Street Fighter 3. And is perhaps the most memorable of an otherwise lackluster lineup of new combatants that they added to the franchise with the games. So today, let's discuss why people love this man, his original concept, his story within the Street Fighter universe, and each and every one of his appearances in games and other media. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the gentlemanly story of Dudley. Yeah! But first, a big thank you to Magic Spoon for sponsoring this video. When I was a small boy, I would adore a bowl of sweet, sugary, delicious carb-filled cereal to start off my day. But as an adult, I try to eat healthy and stay in shape in order to live my best life possible. In my wrestling days, I would often partake in strict diet routines to remain looking good and made do with the best options I could think of. Eating cereal was completely out of the question, but now things have changed. Magic Spoon is a succulent, healthy breakfast cereal that is gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free and low-carb, making it even keto-friendly, so no more milk-covered sausages for Big Daddy Top Hat. It has 0 grams of sugar, 13 to 14 grams of protein and only 4 net grams of carbs in each serving, and it's only 140 calories per serving. To my surprise, the Magic Spoon tastes amazing, meaning I can throw my milky sausagey delicacy out of the window. This one tastes just as good as the cereals I grew up eating, with my personal favourite being peanut butter. If you're like me and have some health and fitness goals for 2022 but aren't really sure where to start, you need to try Magic Spoon as a low carb, high protein and 0 gram sugar alternative. Click the link below to get some Magic Spoon cereal today to help you accomplish your health goals in the new year. Grab a variety pack and try it today, and be sure to use the promo code TOPHAT at checkout to get $5 off any order, or go to magicspoon.com/TopHat. And Magic Spoon is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 100% happiness guarantee, so if you don't like it for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. So click the link below and use the code TOPHAT for $5 off, or go to magicspoon.com/TopHat to save $5 today. Yeah! Street Fighter 2, released in arcades back in 1991, is memorable for all sorts of reasons, so it is no wonder that the game received the popularity that it did. It pretty much defined the one-on-one versus fighting genre as we know it, serving as the blueprint for pretty much all games in the genre to come. But amongst its most recognisable elements would be the game's now iconic roster. With the exception of Ken and Palette Swap Ken, the rest of them were all unique and stood out from one another, which was partly achieved by creating a ridiculous amount of ethnic stereotypes who would utilise a combat style associated with their nation of origin. In many ways it was cheesy and ridiculous, but certainly all in good fun, as no one is going to forget Dao Sim's stretchy yoga abilities, or Zangief's Soviet wrestling skills and victory dance with Mikhail Gorbachev. Like Punch-Out before it, these larger-than-life stereotypes were part of the essence of what the Street Fighter franchise was. But by the game's true sequel in 1997, the series began to take a slightly different path. The so-called new generation of fighters that Street Fighter 3 would introduce would on the whole not offer the same levels of appeal, with the first edition of the game offering characters such as Oro, Necro and Gil, all of which at a glance you would not even be able to tell what they were supposed to be. Sure, we had Blanka in Street Fighter 2, but he was the game's only inhuman freak, so was memorable and stood out. The same could not be said for the new weirdos of Street Fighter 3. While this was the case for many of the fighters in the game, one fighter on the other hand would stand out from the pack, more than any of the others, who would not have looked out of place in the slightest if he had been placed in Street Fighter 2 at an earlier date. Of course, I am talking about Dudley, a larger-than-life, ridiculously stereotypical character who just screams classic Street Fighter. This well-dressed Englishman utilises the gentlemanly combat art of boxing and is defined by his chivalrous polite nature paired with his contrastingly at points snooty attitude. He represents a particular well-known stereotyped side of British culture, so it is not surprising that I adopted a similar style to him throughout my wrestling career, despite never even playing Street Fighter 3 by that point. Dudley is awesome, so let's look at his concept beyond the surface level. Upon his 1997 debut, Dudley would join the ranks of the World Warriors, appearing sporting a pair of green dinner suit trousers that would be paired with matching green suspenders, as well as a white dress shirt that is frilled at the placket. Further to this, he would wear a matching green bow tie that would be complemented by his smart, elegant black dress shoes. Even in combat, Dudley manages to keep his black hair and old-fashioned moustache tidy, illustrating that style is just as important to this man as his substance. First impressions count after all, which is why no one forgets him. As mentioned, Dudley utilises a boxing style, so he engages in fisticuffs wearing a pair of blue boxing gloves that he appears to never take off, even if he is simply enjoying a spot of tea or reading the newspaper. When it comes to Dudley's over-the-top persona, like many fighters from this universe, some predict that the character was based on a real-life person. In Dudley's case, many speculate that his creation was inspired by Chris Eubank, a former WBO super middleweight and junior heavyweight champion, who was a popular athlete within the world of boxing upon Street Fighter 3's release. Like Dudley, Eubank too was an eccentric British boxer who was famous for his stiff upper lip, well-spoken accent and his over-the-top flamboyant dress sense. Post-boxing career, he would even carve out a niche for himself as a reality TV star in the UK, with him these days accompanying his son Chris Eubank Jr. to the ring, with his persona being just as strong today as a WWE-like wrestling manager as it was during his heyday during the 90s. It is easy to see why perhaps Capcom saw this individual and thought that it would be great to make a Street Fighter character based around him. I would love to go youth hosteling with this man. As for Dudley's story within the Street Fighter 3 universe, it is said that he comes from a wealthy family, with his father being a highly paid former athlete turned successful businessman. From a small boy, Dudley dreamed of becoming a fighter, however his family would tell him he was too small to compete. Moving through time, his father would lose his family fortune, which would be enough to spur Dudley on to follow his dreams and become a professional boxer to try and claw the family fortune back. Like Chris Eubank once more, Dudley would be too small to compete as a heavyweight, so he would be prompted to rely on his speed and skill to bring affluence instead. Dudley seeks perfection in his life both in and out of the ring, always trying his best to behave like an impeccable gentleman, once again drawing parallels with his likely real-life counterpart. Upon his debut appearance in Street Fighter 3 New Generation, Dudley would manage to learn who had purchased and become the owner of his father's Jaguar. While I would like to think he is talking about an Atari Jaguar here, sadly he is instead talking about the famous British car brand. Throughout the game, Dudley appears quite snobbish and haughty, and surprisingly confrontational for someone who considers themselves a gentleman. For example, when competing with Alex in the third World Warrior tournament, he disrespects him by referring to him as an ill-mannered goon, or even more hilariously, when he faces off against Ken, he calls him a sissy man. He seems to take an utter delight in giving his perceived lessers a bloody good thrashing. Some speculate that his bad boy attitude was because the character had not been particularly fleshed out yet, where others indicate this was due to him being angry over his father's car. Personally, if you have followed boxing, I would say that this early depiction of Dudley was hugely in line with that of Chris Eubank, as although Eubank presented himself as a gentleman, his detractors would tell you otherwise. In his epic feud with Nigel Benn, for example, Ben would infer that Eubank was no more than a boy from the streets like him, but pretending to be someone he isn't. In a hilarious pre-match interview with both Ben and Eubank simultaneously, Eubank shows such disrespect for Ben that he refuses to even look at him, choosing to sit facing away from him. When questioned about this, Eubank states regarding Ben, "I find the man intolerable. He's wild and I have no time for such people. He has no class as far as I see it. After I finish with him, he will be a nobody." Illustrating the same disrespect for his opponent that Dudley would show off in his 1997 Street Fighter debut. As for his fighting style, it has stayed consistent throughout the series, with his boxing style reflecting his personality, using many professional techniques and executing them with finesse. This is the polar opposite of Balrog, who would box with a dirtier style, which we shall touch more on later. Being a middleweight combatant, Dudley uses various psychological tricks in order to gain victories, including taking advantage of feints, ducking and drawback manoeuvres before suckering opponents in to hit them with high-speed punches, diving punches and uppercuts. Super arts wise, he can perform the Rolling Thunder, which consists of a series of blows and can execute what is known as his trademark corkscrew blow, a powerful left-handed cross punch that hits 5 times. As a fellow southpaw, this is further proof that all of the best people punch with their left hand. Shout out to William Regal too. Why are we all such walking stereotypes? As for his first ever outing, he finally gets to take on the man in possession of his father's Jaguar, the tournament sponsor and sinister cult leader known as Gil. Upon managing to defeat the opponent, Gil gives the Jaguar key straight back to the boxer. Dudley brags that he whooped all of those hooligans and now he has his pa's car back. The final scenes of the game see Dudley driving the car through the British countryside while hilariously still wearing his boxing gloves. See, I told you he never takes them off. By the third iteration of the game, Street Fighter III Third Strike, which occurs later in the timeline, the game will further expand on the Street Fighter story and begin to build on Dudley's character. With his father's car back, we get a less confrontational Dudley, one who is much more dignified and respectful to his opponents, illustrating that it seems he has grown somewhat. The game outlines that between the events of the games, Dudley has since been knighted by the Queen, receiving an honorary Sir title due to making a successful comeback and winning a championship title. So it is not surprising that in this game, Dudley is in such good spirits in comparison to his previous appearance. After spending time with the British royal family, hopefully not Prince Andrew at Pizza Express, Sir Dudley would choose to travel the world to further refine his skills, which is why he indulges in combat in the game. Third Strike also outlines some of Dudley's other passions, such as his love for gardening, whereby he tends his roses alongside his butler in his giant garden maze. In terms of Street Fighter games, Dudley would make his next playable appearance in Super Street Fighter IV, whereby he would function as just one of 3 returning characters from the Street Fighter III games, earning himself a roster spot, whereas the so-called star of Street Fighter III, Alex, would never make it to the Street Fighter IV dance. So this shows how much Dudley as a character had grown on the fanbase, even if he had only appeared in games previously that few had yet to play. Going off of my previous video on Alex, if we think of this American as the Lex Luger of Street Fighter's new generation, then Dudley was the closest thing the brand would get to making a Bret Hart. But let's be fair, Chris Eubank is more fun than Hart anyway. I know who I found more entertaining in the 90s. Occurring chronologically before his appearances in Street Fighter III, in Super Street Fighter IV, his adventure starts out with him drinking tea at his English countryside home. He receives an invitation to a fighting tournament, and upon deciding that his garden could do with some new roses, he orders his butler to prepare a reply to the invitation at once. To tie the canon together, he even states this would be a good opportunity to take his mind off his father's missing car. Competing in the Sin tournament, Dudley encounters all sorts of opponents, seeing all of these moves returning from previous outings, including an even more powerful version of his patented corkscrew blow. Perhaps the most notable event that takes place for Dudley within Super Street Fighter IV involves him squaring off against fellow boxer Balrog for the first time, with neither fighter appearing in the same game together previously. What makes this interesting is that both characters appear to be based off of real-world boxers who had active careers at the same point in history, but would never face off due to being parts of different weight categories. Balrog, who was based off of heavyweight Mike Tyson, would even mock Dudley's smaller frame, referring to him as a little wimp who is supposed to be the British champion. Despite Dudley noting that Balrog's rudeness knows no bounds, he is not one to turn down a challenge from a fellow pugilist. Dudley has a strong dislike for 2 things: dirty fighters and rude people, so Balrog has traits that he deems completely unacceptable, particularly for one of his fellow boxers. After all, boxing is supposed to be a gentleman's sport, so there is no place for a Balrog. Balrog personifies all that Dudley hates. In many ways, it feels like a rehash of the classic Chris Eubank vs Nigel Benn boxing feud. In Dudley's rival win quotes, he refers to Balrog as not much of a boxer, a classless oaf, and an embarrassment to boxing. All things I could imagine Eubank saying to Ben. Hilariously, this rivalry would be carried over to Dudley's next playable appearance when he appeared as a DLC fighter in Street Fighter Cross Tekken, whereby if he defeats Balrog, it shows him refusing to acknowledge the American heavyweight as a real boxer. In this one, he teams with fellow New Generation member Eleanor. By the end of the game, Dudley invites Eleanor to his mansion, specifically when the roses are in bloom, which Eleanor accepts, suggesting a romance may be blossoming between preparing. In other crossover games previously, Dudley would make a cameo in Capcom vs SNK 2, in the background of his butler on the London stage, and as part of Pyron's ending in the critically panned Capcom Fighting Evolution. Yeah. Sadly, Dudley would not appear as a character within Street Fighter V, which personally I think is a criminal move when we consider his appeal. Here's hoping that they bring him back for Street Fighter 6, or how about have him return in managing his son, Dudley Jr. anyone? I hope today that by exploring the Dudley character and his many parallels with Chris Eubank, that you have more appreciation for the fighter than ever before. He is certainly one of my favourite Street Fighter characters of all time, and the best that the new generation had to offer. If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to subscribe, and if you want to learn more about Street Fighter 3's roster, I have already covered Alex, Gil and even Urien in the past, so why not check those out preceding this video. Videos like this are partially made possible thanks to the amazing people who back this channel on Patreon, who would vote on a poll choosing today's topic for your entertainment. Speaking of these people, who make what I do an awful lot easier, additional thank yous go out to A Murder of Crows, Carl Johnson, Heo Paula Lopez, Nostalgia Collector, Ben Harradine, Corey Imarsh Sr., Ryan Dinch, Evan Border, Philip Manf, Azra Rakai, Dropkin Varela, Michael Cullix, Ego, Jordan Durant, Ian Boyle, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of a Ted, Gary Pinkett, ECU Professor, Johnny Holly, August Piazza, Justin Wang, Capcom vs SNK, Homies Gonzalez, Man Shovel, Michael Hall, Sang Hee, Norma Stitz, Langston Miller, Noob, Sarah Powell, Vlamik Renee, Marinara Liga, TOG Driver, Lewis Viant, John Bates, David Bow, Chris Fisk, Rick67, Antonio Rodriguez, Craig Jenkins, Since Spaces, Punk Toast, and everybody else who backs what I do on the Patreon platform. Thank you very much. Yeah, cheerio.